will be on the topic of lapsed funding, so if that's helpful to all of you. Mr. Corsten, from the reading that we've been doing and what it appears that in Health Canada, almost 35% of total funding ends up in lapsed funding. And my understanding is that lapsed funding, of course, is not spent on programming. Could you explain to the committee where that lapsed funding goes when it's obviously not used, back into general revenues perhaps, and which programs exactly are affected by lapsed funding?
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, Chair. Honestly, I think there are many reasons why programs would lapse funds. There are many consequences to lapse funds, some of which are to have it returned to the general revenue fund. I think in order to give you a sort of a precise accounting of the source of lapse funding for the department, it's probably best that we return to you in writing. We'd be happy to provide that information.
That would be great, Mr. Costin, if you could. And would you be so kind as to detail exactly which programs were affected? And I think it'd be important to look at the last couple of years for lapsed funding. If you would do that and table it with the committee as soon as you can, that would be great.
Yep, that would be fine.
Thank you very much. Ms. Jeffrey, I would ask you the same question under the Public Health Agency of Canada. It would appear that there is lapse funding in the years that we're able to look at. I obviously don't have this year's figures, but perhaps 47% of the funding of PHAC ended up in lapsed funding. And my question to you is similar to Mr. Costin. Could you confirm that that is a considerably high number, in my opinion? And if you're not able to do so now, could you please table with the committee the exact programs that have been affected over the last 2 years with lapsed funding?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, in 23-24, the lapse reported by the Public Health Agency was $1.1 billion. All of this money, in large part, was related to COVID-19 expenditures that did not need to take place due to the fact that the emergency phase of the pandemic has subsided. Some of this money, $59 million, was reprofiled to future years. And the lapse is attributed to a reduction in vaccine and therapeutics procurement, a reduction in the need to purchase medical countermeasures, and a reduction in the costs of warehousing due to the end of the emergency phase of the pandemic. If you'd like further detail, we have our CFO, Martin Crimmins, here, who can further elaborate.
I appreciate that. I think that's sufficient. Again, if you could table that in writing to the committee, that would be most helpful. A couple of questions, Ms. Jeffrey, if I might. And just for the record, that I believe Ms. Jeffrey concurred that, yes, she would provide that in writing. I saw her head nodding, just to be clear on that. Talk a bit about the national stockpile for Canadians, if you would. How are we doing with the national stockpile? And do we have specific measures in place related to ensuring that we're not going to have expired national stockpile as we saw before the terrible pandemic of 2020?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, a comprehensive management plan has been put in place for the National Emergency Stockpile. The stockpile contains both assets in the form of goods such as cots and blankets for emergency response, as well as medical countermeasures, vaccines and therapeutics to support provinces and territories in emergencies. An inventory management system has been modernized and put in place. The stockpile is obviously much more significant than it was pre-pandemic, and it has a diversity of supplies and has been used, in fact, to respond to emergencies since COVID-19 outbreaks such as Mpox and wildfires and other areas where provinces and territories requested federal support.
Thanks very much, Ms. Jeffrey. And could you undertake to provide the committee a list of those items that are in the stockpile and the amounts? I think that would be important for Canadians to know. For instance, are there N95 masks there, cots, blankets, the numbers? That would be important for Canadians to know. So, as I said, if you could undertake to provide that to the committee, I think that would make sense. we've come back previously to this promise from the NDP Liberal government on the Canada Mental Health Transfer. And Mr. Costin, if I recall correctly, back when I came here in 2021, the amount was $4.5 billion. Can you tell the Canadians how much of that $4.5 billion has been allocated to mental health care?
I couldn't off the top of my head, but I'd be very happy to return with that figure in writing.
Thank you, Mr. Costin.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Next, Ms. Kayabaga for 5 minutes, please.